So now let's give you a preview of what will be covered in today's webinar. We're going to go ahead and talk about how to build foundational skills for today's cyber jobs, how to prepare for the top cyber specialties of tomorrow, how to go from a foundational skill set to a specialized skill set, how top cybersecurity organizations are developing their employees, and finally, how you can get started with Global Knowledge and Focal Point Academy training options. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. So first off, we have Buffy Ellis. She is the Executive Vice President of Focal Point Academy. She has over 25 years of experience in network design, vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, and network monitoring and analysis. Buffy leads a team of phenomenal technical experts in delivering hands-on cyber training courses. Next, we have Julian Smith, who is the Director of Cyber Workforce Development for Focal Point Academy. He is a computer scientist by training and has more than 15 years of experience in cyber defense and cybersecurity training, specializing in network security analysis. He has worked with both the US and British governments in cyber defense. He's been a full-time instructor and previously served as Director of Education, heading up Focal Point's team of expert instructors, researchers, and curriculum specialists in producing and delivering cutting-edge hands-on cyber skills training for both public and private sector clients. And finally, we have Justin Avery. He's the Director of Business Development at Focal Point Academy. Justin is a cyber workforce development subject matter expert. He oversees a national team of cybersecurity workforce development sales representatives and sales engineers. He's a prominent thought leader in the field of workforce development and has spent much of his career focused on strategies for developing high-performing technical workforces. Prior to joining Focal Point, Justin was a director on the Federal Systems Integrator team at Global Knowledge, where he led a large sales team focused on IT training. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand over to Justin, and he's going to kick it off from here.
Thanks, Kevin, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I am Justin Avery, the Director of Business Development for Focal Point Academy. I want to talk a little bit to you just about who we are at Academy and our history with Global Knowledge. As Kevin mentioned, I'm a longtime former employee of Global Knowledge, as well as a large group of our team actually came from there as well. And with Focal Point Academy, I came here because we specialize in, as it says, advanced cybersecurity training and workforce development programs. And what that means is our core competency is that we focus specifically on practitioners, SOC assets, the people that are actually doing that frontline work of defending networks, whether in commercial entities or in the federal space as well. Our background is over 15 years, and predominantly the first 10 years of that, give or take, was exclusively in the government, military, and intelligence communities. And then we took that role over to the commercial side of the house as well, which is where we are and where some of you are coming to us from today as well. In that time, we've trained over 25,000 people extensively, specifically for their roles within cybersecurity and based on their current status of aptitude. We have an exceptional instructor rating from our customer base. We've been doing metrics that matter type tracking for the entire time that we've been in existence and enjoy a solid 4.9 out of 5. Our instructors are some of the people that come out of the very environments that we turn around and teach in. We look for the best and the brightest and the people that are actually out there doing the work on the front lines, not just people that have read books or manuals. We have a facility in Columbia, Maryland, which is where we've been for a very long time now. We can train over 200 people at a time, but we also have an extensive virtual platform that we work on, obviously with the modern reality of COVID. We have a badging program. Badges are our certification of skills leveraged and learned as opposed to knowledge retained. And we've issued 1,300 of those to date. That is a new program for us. And we trained and screened over 1,000 people this year alone. We're going to talk about our screening program later, but our ability to assess a current state is a cornerstone of who we are and what we do. We have currently 10 of our core competency programs are being delivered virtually, as I mentioned, so that we are able to work with your team in a time of COVID. That's a little bit about who we are. Please feel free to ask more questions. But at this point, I'm going to turn this over for the meat of the matter, which you're all here to learn about today, to Buffy Ellis and to Julian Smith. Thank you.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And, you know, Julian and I were talking briefly before we started the webinar about how we wanted to approach this, and really we want it to be a conversation of which you guys are definitely part. So feel free to throw questions in the Q&A as we move along. But where we wanted to start is just talk a little bit about the cybersecurity field. I would say that I've been in cybersecurity for roughly 15 to 20 years, but that's a hard distinction to make because the field itself is relatively new. The terms we use to describe it and to describe the roles within the field are constantly changing. And that's one of the things that we'll talk about today. Julie, you want to say hi?
Hi, yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are. And yeah, I'm glad to have you with us today. I would say a similar thing to Buffy, that putting a finger on when I actually entered the field of cybersecurity is not really an easy thing to do, because there are so many roles that are really cyber roles in nature, but aren't necessarily these very kind of highly technical roles that we'll talk about in part today as well. I do have a technical background, but also more of a kind of a broader workforce development background, and hopefully that will be useful in today's discussion.
Sure. So we wanted to start with just talking about what the field of opportunity is as it relates to cybersecurity. I think if we look globally at the numbers of workforce studies, employment studies, the thing that's consistent is that there are millions of open cyber roles for which there aren't enough qualified candidates. And that hasn't changed over the last 5 years. In fact, we stack on top of that things like attrition rates, how often people leave cyber roles to go to other jobs. And if you combine the two, what you see is just a continual demand for qualified people. And for me, if I were looking to transition into a new career or just entering the workforce, I'd be looking for a field that had a lot of opportunity and a lot of growth potential. So I think that's the first thing that I would like to highlight. Julian, do you want to add to that?
I think that's yes and no. I could say the same thing over again, right? That there are so many jobs out there that need to be filled, and they are actually very diverse in nature as well. So, and we'll be talking about that a good bit today, and how we have the example, the headline of this webinar, which is from analyst to threat hunter, but that's really just one example, one path that can be followed. So I think the broadness of the field, the broadness of the opportunities that are out there, and just the depth of need that exists in the marketplace is the thing I would really want to highlight from right up front. And if you're not a strongly technical person, that shouldn't be a put off to joining the cybersecurity field in some way.
Yeah, and I would definitely consider that our field to be one that's forward looking, that's sort of future proof. As I thought of IT back in the 90s and early 2000s, that there will be a continual need as the challenges in the field of security and security threats continue to evolve, that the roles themselves will evolve, but there will be continual opportunity. I would add to that, though, that our field is one of the unique fields in which even the starting salaries and the potential for growth are quite big and impressive compared to perhaps other fields. Even entry-level salaries can be quite high, and the opportunity for both career progression and future roles that may or may not have a technical component are quite compelling to consider cybersecurity as a potential path. But you notice that we've also added some few, what I would consider to be soft elements to the career field, to include diversity, challenge, and making a positive impact on the world. That folks often come to this field for other reasons besides just great job opportunity, great money, and great career progression. I would say that I'm a defender, and I love that terminology, the idea that I'm protecting intellectual property, I'm protecting, in some cases, my country from outside threat, I'm protecting intellectual resources, people's private data. There's so many different opportunities to do good and to touch the lives of others through this work.
Yeah, I would add to that. In fact, that's part of the reason that I got into this field in the first place as well. When I came out of college, I was looking for a job that would have positive impact. I came out of college with a computer science degree and interviewed for a bunch of programming roles and software development, things like that. And those things were appealing, but what I was really looking for was what's something that where I can actually see a positive impact on at least a portion of society, protecting protecting the people that I know and love, protecting the institutions, organizations, companies that I benefit from that help our society and economy roll along. So it's definitely a very fulfilling field to be in.
Agreed. Well, let's talk a little bit more about who might be good in terms of a cyber professional role or career. I wanted to share a few kind of personal experiences with folks, but before I go there, just generally, when I look at the areas listed on this slide, and this came from our team, we were sitting around talking about, what makes a good cyber defender, what makes a good cyber analyst, what makes a good cyber program manager, that it isn't having one person with all of these areas of specialty. It's more likely to be creating a team where I'm pulling in individuals who each have one or more of these as areas of strength. And it's that team of individuals that actually brings forth a solution. And I think what sometimes might be overwhelming for folks looking to transition into this field or progress in this field is the belief that they have to know everything, or the belief that they have to be extremely technical to be successful. Julian, we were talking about that this morning. What else can you add to that?
Well, I would say that, yeah, this list definitely that we have here, puzzle solvers, critical thinkers, creatives, communicators, techies, that is by no means an exclusive list. And as Buffy said, it's not one person's job to be all of those things. I think that the most important thing to emphasize here is just the breadth of places that you could come into a cyber job from, and a technical background is one of those, but it's maybe not even the primary one. I know Buffy's going to share some examples here shortly of career transitions that folks have made. I'll just share one kind of anecdotal story from a customer engagement that I did a short while back with a small security team. 5 or 6 individuals, and they were almost all exclusively from a technical background except one. And the one member, he was the junior member of the team, and it was a retail customer that I was working with, and he had actually come from the fraud department that they had, as in like stock loss actually off the shop floor, like people, how do they detect the strategies people are using to try and actually steal things from stores. And he brought with him this fantastic inquisitive mindset of trying to solve the puzzle, right? He was a puzzle solver, and he was already 6 months into that team. He was already the equal of all of the people alongside him who had those deeper, longer technical backgrounds. So this really is, this list could go on and on. If you're somebody who's very detail oriented in the sense that you like everything to be in its place, you have a very ordered mind, and you like, and maybe you do something like audit and compliance work now, that can carry into cyber work very easily, because a lot of the systems that fall under audit requirements now have they're all internet connected. A lot of them might be now cloud hosted as well, so they're not even on premise at the company that they belong to. So there's a huge cyber component to doing that kind of job. Or you could be completely the opposite. You could be the puzzle solver who doesn't like everything to be neat and an ordered list. They like the challenge of, I'm just going to dig into this situation and see what I can find. So there's almost, I mean, we have these on the slide to provide some guidelines, but there's really almost no limit to the type of person you could be as you come into a cyber field.
And I think unfortunately for a long time, there was this sort of armchair warrior, single person in their hoodie, solving all the world's technical and cyber problems. But the reality is most cyber problems are solved by teams. And in order to have a team, you need players of different types with different strengths. You also have to have strong communications and problem solving across the team. We've seen some interesting things in cyber ranges, for example, where teams that have less technical capability are able to solve the problem at hand because they're excellent communicators. Whereas folks that are extremely technical, like off the charts technical, aren't able to perform well because they can't communicate with each other, or they don't rely on each other and work as a team and bring out each other's strengths to solve the problem. So, I think we've made the point that it takes all kinds, but I would like to give you a couple examples from folks that I work with now or have worked with in the past, and just to kind of explain or show some of the paths through which people have entered a cyber career. The first is a homemaker who had taken time out to raise children and returned to the workplace after 15 years of being out of the office. But this person's background was a degree in business and previous work in logistics. And what that person brought to bear is a unique problem solving, very strong communication skills, and results oriented focus. The second is a history professor, actually, a PhD in history. This person was great at research, very detail oriented, and as you, go through the process of getting your PhD, there's a tremendous standard of proof that you have to learn to meet, which when you apply it to cybersecurity research, it gives you a new lens through which you can analyze, is the data that I'm presenting data of merit? Do I have things to back up my opinion and the strength of my opinion based on what I've found? What I also found was interesting is that he was comfortable not having all the answers. So that was a good background to bring to cyber. One of my favorites is a police officer, someone who had been a detective, used to approaching large complex problems using a method of investigation, plus relying on their own past experience. And taking that along with a willingness to learn, this person actually spent evenings, weekends teaching themselves technology and cyber, and took an entry-level job with our organization. So my point is that you can come to this field from all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of pathways, but I would also point out that the actual positions that you end up in don't always have to be technical or extremely technically focused. We have folks that are program managers, sales folks, sales engineering, marketing, management, solution architecting, recruiters, trainers, and mentors. Now, all of those have different characters or traits to those roles. They aren't all technically focused.
Yeah, recruitment actually is a big one, isn't it? That's if there's a way to rank the critical gaps in the cybersecurity workforce right now, having well-grounded recruiters who are versed enough in cybersecurity to know who to look for and how to screen and interview well, that's a huge challenge, because we see that constantly. In fact, I see some questions in the Q&A about, how do I get into this field? How do I get started? So we'll come to some things like some common courses, some common a couple of some of the common certifications that customers that employers look for, and the skill sets on top of that folks would need to develop in order to be successful in some of these fields. We'll be coming to that shortly, but I would say, even if you let's say you worked in recruitment and you want to transition to a cyber role, then actually doing cyber recruitment could be a great fit, because there's a huge need there for sure.
Sure, in sales and sales engineering,
Yep.
Being able to learn enough about a product or service to present it to someone verbally, right? And then as you progress in that field, learning more detail of that product or service that you're offering, which might be a pathway then to transition onto the service side from the sales side, which we've actually seen more than once in our organization. And as Julian said, we're going to come back to and talk a little bit about breaking into the field, what kind of entry-level roles there might be, and what might a pathway be to get to those. Before we do that, though, talking about some of the more technical roles on this slide, over on the left on the job categories, these are what we would call domains. They're areas of focus. This is not an exhaustive list. It's just a partial list from what is called the NICE framework, which is the cybersecurity framework in which they've defined all the different roles that might be in this field and what areas of skill and ability you would need to have to be in those fields. But I would caution or note that you don't have to have all of those to start a job in the field. It's just an aspirational goal to continue to develop those skills as your career progresses. And we're listing some of those job roles here: cybersecurity analyst, cybersecurity engineer. I'm gonna just pause there for a second. An analyst is someone who is looking at data. Now that data might be network traffic, it could be logs on a host, it could be logs from a piece of software and watching how, say, maybe a piece of malware functions on a host. But the role of an analyst is actually to draw conclusions from what they're seeing and to investigate what they're seeing. And I think I want to distinguish that between that and an engineer. An engineer is someone who designs solutions. So typically an engineer would be implementing things like hardware and software solutions to solve a cybersecurity problem. And both of those are equally important roles, but they draw to them folks with different backgrounds and strengths. Julian, what's been your experience with those?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm of the analytic mindset, right? That's my background. So I have really enjoyed work that I've done in that kind of analyst role, and it's sort of an investigator role. It's a solve the puzzle sort of role. But as Buffy was saying, the engineer role is very much a building things role, and that's a very different focus, and it takes a different type of person, even though the technical skill sets are very similar, right? You still need to understand the technologies, the security technologies that exist. You need to understand what we call the threat landscape looks like. So what types of things are you actually trying to protect your networks and systems from? But it's very different. Somebody who functions in that kind of role needs a very different kind of personal mindset to somebody who's an analyst. And it goes, we can go on down that list in the same way. Somebody who functions as a cybersecurity consultant, the best from an interpersonal point of view, the best person for that job is someone who loves getting alongside other people and helping them to achieve success, right? That's a great mindset to have for a consultant. But it's not great to have if you're an engineer, because if you're an engineer, your job is to build the thing and make it work and test it and everything. And it's not great if you're an analyst, because if you're an analyst, your job is to investigate and get to the bottom of things and help get things returned to a normal and safe state. So the same technical skill sets can be applied in a lot of different ways depending on what your personal strengths are.
Sure, and I think as you look to enter or progress in this career field, I think one of the key things I would suggest is that you find a mentor in someone who is already in the field, because you want to ask questions. You want to find out, where is the intersection of your personal strengths and interests with what's available in terms of jobs in the field. And you want to find one that ideally is the marriage of those two things. And to Julian's point, each one of those three roles, analyst, engineer, consulting, require and bring out the best in certain skill sets. If we go down to the bottom three, network engineer is similar to cybersecurity engineer. I think the key distinction is network engineers typically building the network infrastructure of an organization, but aren't not necessarily focused on the cybersecurity components. The cybersecurity components would be things like firewalls, intrusion detection systems, various filtering tools like antivirus and spam and other solutions. So that's the key distinction between the two. Then we get into pen testing, which you can hear the smile in my voice. Pen testing is being paid to be a hacker, which, of all the things that we talk
Sounds
about,
great, doesn't it?
right? Yeah. Every time we give someone one of our catalogs, they go straight to the classes that have hacker or malicious in the title, and we get that. That's the fun part. That's the exciting part. And frankly, it to a certain degree that can be one of the easier things to do, to break in. It's much harder to take the position of defense and try to prevent the break-in. But pen testers are paid to try to compromise a system or network in order to find the holes, right? The objective of pen testing is to ultimately find and mitigate those problems before someone else finds them for you. And lastly, we have incident responder. An incident responder, if you ever have heard of Security Operations Center terminology, those would be referred to often as Tier 1. It is an entry-level role within the Security Operations Center, but it's a very critical role. These folks are the ones that often first identify areas of trouble. They can, using sensors and logs, identify where a host might be compromised, a network might be compromised, and ideally they work alongside the analyst to correlate the information across a large network, perhaps a global network, to identify emerging threats or problems as they occur. That's the ideal. Unfortunately, often you hear from a breach point of view that the problems may have occurred long in the past, but it's still these analysts and responders who are sifting through logs to reconstruct the story of how the compromise occurred.
Yeah, I think one thing I'd just like to add on the incident responder role is that that's a job that some people really enjoy in and of itself, right? It's a job that often revolves around what we call playbooks. So something happened and I have a playbook of how I respond to that situation. What you often see in that role is a split between people who like that approach to work. They like that idea of, okay, this thing happened and I'm supposed to respond like this according to the playbook. And then you find people who are in that role and they're the ones who like to ask questions like, well, this thing happened and I know that I'm supposed to do steps A, B, and C from the playbook, but what does it mean, this alert that I got? What does it actually mean underneath the hood? What happened? And why do I do steps A, B, and C? Is there a better way to do something? And if you find yourself in that position, then that's a good indication that you'd be more suited to, say, an analyst role or the threat hunter role. And that's a great thing to recognize. And it can also be a great springboard. So incident responder roles, as Buffy said, they're typically entry-level roles in a security team. So they're the kind of role that you could get into with some level of certification, some level of experience with, maybe it's not even in full-time employment, but some level of experience working with an organization in security. And getting that could be a first step into the field for people. But it's also a role that you can really launch from to different places. And you can take, if you're in that role, if you're in a role as an incident responder, or maybe you're in a role that is, there's somehow close or connected to your cybersecurity team, but not really part of it. You can use that to your advantage. By learning to ask those questions, okay, be the disruptor, be the person who says, okay, I know we're supposed to do this, but why is that? Why do we even have this system in the first place? My alert tells me that a system was breached, but what does that system do? And why do we need it? And can we do things differently or better to avoid these breaches in the future? So you can train yourself by developing an inquisitive mindset if you want to progress from a role like that into one of these more kind of specialist roles of being something like a threat hunter or a threat intelligence analyst. And I think we're going to talk about emerging and future roles next. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, speaking of threat
right,
intelligence.
speaking of which, and I think we probably should have called this slide emerging roles as opposed to future, because some of these exist already for sure. The question mark there is there on purpose, because frankly, if you go back 10 years, a lot of these roles did not exist. And so who knows exactly which roles we will have in the next 10 years, depending on how the technology landscape changes and the types of threats that we're facing change. But we've already seen things like roles like these come to prominence to some extent. So roles like the threat hunter role, where your job basically is to go and find the thing. In a nutshell, your job is to find the thing that your security system did not alert you to. Right? You have to assume that something has happened and go and find that thing. And there are various levels of threat hunting. The sort of the purest view, the very formal view of it, is that you make a hypothesis about something that has happened. You say, I am a retail organization. I am, a retail company, and therefore I'm going to assume that some hacking group may have tried to compromise my point of sale machine so that they can steal credit card information from my customers. And I'm
very
going,
likely scenario.
right, exactly. So I'm going to test that hypothesis by going and looking for the signs of people doing that, even if I don't have any alerts telling me that it has happened. So that's the sort of essence of the threat hunter role. And you can see how it relies on understanding the security technology. It's great. It's a great role to transition to from more of an incident responder or analyst role. That's not a role that you can jump straight into as a kind of a real entry level role, unless you've done something that's very comparable in a different field, right? That kind of hunting out mindset and learning to look for things that you can't see. And there are roles that exist in completely different fields where you can make that transition, but you have to have that sort of experience of approach, I think, to make that really stick.
Sure, I'll take.
Go ahead. Yeah.
IAM analyst, because that one's one that I find interesting to see sort of how rapidly IAM in general is evolving over the last 4 or 5 years. It's significantly changed. But just a word about what it is, right? So when we go back in time and talk about IT and the transition into cyber, one of the emerging concepts was the idea of access control. We have these things, resources, computers, files, databases, and we want to identify who you are and what your role is within my organization, and therefore what rights of access you should have or not have to those resources. And it goes beyond the things I just mentioned. It's the network, it's the rooms, it's everything about your intellectual property and other resources. That concept has evolved greatly, partly out of a need, right? So as organizations have taken the things I mentioned and moved them out into clouds or hosted environments, and as businesses have actually integrated their network with third-party suppliers. So we follow the supply chain, and it might be 3 or 4 organizations deep, and they have interconnected networks, and they're sharing data, they're sharing ordering, they're sharing order fulfillment and tracking information. The web of how people access my resources becomes quite complex. And what identity and access management analysts do is analyze that web. And what we've seen over the last 5 years is what used to be solutions that were governed by my Active Directory or my network infrastructure. So I'm relying on my routers or my firewalls to do access control, or I'm relying on my Active Directory domain controller to do access control. Those aren't true anymore because my data and my people and my resources are all over the place. So we've seen tons of new cloud hosted solutions that address part of that problem. They might just address your users working remotely or your third-party vendors. And so it's gotten quite complex, and it is definitely a need then to have people who focus on and understand those solutions and understand how they come together to secure a particular organization and control who has access to what. So that's what an identity and access management analyst does.
Yeah, I think we could spend a lot of time talking about the rest of these. I'm a bit worried that we might run ourselves a bit short on time, especially with some of the questions that we've got.
Okay.
lining
Maybe we
up.
can
But
do high level and then jump to
sure,
the, yeah.
absolutely. I mean, threat intelligence and business intelligence are related for sure, and so those are roles around threat intelligence, particularly around what different kind of bad actors, bad groups are attempting to do in the world, and what kind of tactics and techniques they're using, and which of those might apply to my organization, which might I need to look for. Business intelligence, very much more around business process. So how do I monitor the I guess the data efficiency of my business, might be one way to put it. How do I make sure that my data is protected, that it's maintained its integrity? How do I monitor my business processes to make sure that they are working safely and completely? And there are lots of different ways you could look at that, don't Buffy, if you have a different
Yeah,
high-level
sure.
take on it.
Well, no, everything you said is true. And I would add to that that business intelligence touches business process, right? How do I go to market? How do I sell? How do I fulfill orders? If you've heard the term digital transformation, most of what they're talking about falls within business intelligence. And we think about things like, I would love to know, why do my customers buy? When do they buy? What triggers them to buy? Are certain words used in my advertising more effective than others? All of what I just described falls in the area of business intelligence, and it's leveraging the data from every transaction that people do with you to understand and hopefully draw conclusions that are meaningful. Like, what does this tell me? Well, it tells me I should use these words in my advertisement, or it tells me that I should advertise at midnight 2 days before Thanksgiving in the US, whatever the business intelligence tells you. But it's an interconnection of the data and actually using data to drive business decisions and business results.
Yeah, the last one here, just before we move on, that cloud security analyst. I know I saw a question in the list there about how cloud is connected to cybersecurity. Well, it's absolutely interwoven with cybersecurity. So an emerging field for sure is learning how to apply some of the same concepts that were traditionally done within an organization's infrastructure, and being able to apply those on infrastructure that you don't actually own and control. And so there are lots of different ways in which that changes the picture, because you might not even have permission to do certain things that you would normally do on your own infrastructure. You might need to get permission from the cloud provider to be able to do the kind of investigation that you would want to do, or maybe you want to actually do penetration testing against your cloud services, and that might require extra permission. So getting some of the biggest problems in cloud security are getting reliable data flows, now understanding, we call it telemetry, right? What telemetry data can you actually get from your cloud providers, and what can you do about it if you discover anomalies? So it's definitely a different kind of flavor of the traditional cybersecurity analyst.
Well, in true form, Julian and I both at various times have been instructors, so we tend to end up with more content and presentations than we can actually cover in the given amount of time. So I do apologize for that, but boy, when we get to talking, we can go. So I want to make sure we touch on these other areas, because obviously a lot of the questions are around how do you get into cybersecurity and how do you identify the role that might be the right fit for you. As I hope we've made a good point of, you can come from any kind of background. It's really about diversity of mindset and really building a team that has folks that specialize in different areas, that have different strengths, and working together, we solve the problems of cybersecurity. But specifically, there are many paths to enter the field formally and informally. There are a number of college, university, 2-year schools that have some type of cybersecurity program. I would say that our experience from dealing directly with hiring managers in Fortune 100 and Fortune 50 companies around the world is college and training in and of itself isn't the only thing that will get you a job or keep you a job. You need to marry knowledge with skill. And you can acquire that skill through a number of different ways. Self-study is definitely one of them. I mentioned the police officer who we ended up hiring, who took it upon himself to study at night, to go take exams, and to learn by building a lab and using the tools and software he could find to teach himself this field. And we all were extremely impressed by his initiative and ingenuity, but it was valid. He successfully learned things. When we interviewed him, we gave him challenges and technical problems, and he was able to demonstrate an understanding of the problem and a possible solution to us. And that merited hiring him. And he did not have any formal work experience or even formal training other than what he had done on his own.
And I'll add to that as well. It was not that he trained himself to become a fully proficient cyber professional. What stood out to us is that he had taken the initiative and got started, and taken responsibility for his own career transition, and could demonstrate, hey, I come from this background. I've decided that I would like to move into this, and these are the things that I've done so far in order to get me there, and the success that I've achieved. And it was having enough of a start that piqued our interest for sure, and to say, look, yeah, this is great, and you're obviously you're self-motivated and taking responsibility for your own progression, and it's worked out incredibly well. I think the big thing I would want to emphasize looking at this slide is that there is a shift. You'll still see, if you're looking at job adverts in the cyber field, you will still see very widespread requirements for degrees, very widespread requirements for certain types of certification. But what I will say is that is the cyber recruitment field is trending away from that, not towards it at this point. There is a strong kind of motivation among a lot of employers, I've worked with a bunch of large organizations in the US, and a lot of academic institutions on the other side, a lot of people who are of various sorts, whether it's colleges, K through 12. The idea of getting people to the requisite level, like what's the minimum that I need to be able to start being successful in this field, as opposed to having extensive hiring requirements and a list as long as your arm of all of the certifications or qualifications that you expect somebody to have. So it may be disheartening if you're job hunting in the cyberspace. You may find a lot of job opportunities that you feel that you simply cannot apply for because you don't have those things. I would say two things to that. One is take heart, because we are moving steadily, or slowly but steadily, away from that model. But secondly, be encouraged to throw out some speculative applications, right? Don't think, oh, I'm discounted from this because I don't have that degree. Show a willingness to learn, and that will go a long way with potential employers.
It's interesting, because one of the things, we have a very multi-stage, shall I say, hiring process. And one of the things that we do is we purposely challenge candidates by giving them problems we know they can't solve, or giving them problems just to see how they react to a problem. And in some cases, are they able to admit that they don't know? Are they interested enough to learn? Are they willing to take feedback from us? Those are characteristics that we're looking for. A willingness and a desire to learn, for me, is far more interesting and important to be successful than passing a certification exam, which proves to me you can memorize a set of data long enough to pass a test. So I would say there's definitely a shift there. And I agree with Julian, take a chance, apply for a job, but also go into that interview knowing what strengths you need to be able to demonstrate beyond just technical experience. Yep. I think one of the things I wanted to touch on here before we go to the next slide, and I realize we're shortly running out of time, is that with COVID, one of the things we're seeing a lot of are emerging cyber programs that are sponsored by state or municipality governments, federal governments, large businesses that are willing to hire during this time, where they're creating sort of a learning program combined with some type of internship. And I look at those as a tremendous opportunity and a way into this field where there may be grants or funding outside of the normal sources to allow you to make this transition, especially right now, if you've lost a job or your job's been impacted by COVID. So I would encourage you to seek those out. There are tons of ways to fund this type of progression. One of the other sorry, go ahead, Julian.
No, okay, sure. So this diagram screenshot is taken from, well, actually it's a combination. What's left of the line here is taken from a website called cyberseek.org. And that is a jointly kind of funded and sponsored website where you can look for career pathways, and it gives you an idea of what roles are available. It's largely US focused in terms of the actual job data, like the number of jobs available in different places and the salaries available and things. But what it does tell you is what kind of things are those employers looking for those roles. So if you are looking, I see there have been some questions here coming up about, well, how do I get started in this area or that? And would you consider things like blue team to be more foundational than red team or penetration testing? To which I would say yes, I would consider penetration testing to be a specialist skill, and having a grounding as a blue team member, a defender in some capacity is a very, I'd say a very important thing. But this can help to guide you because there are so many roles. There is no one size, one track, just take these 4 things and you'll be fine. We've got some examples here of ways you can do that and some kind of the broad foundations coming up here, but there is no one path into any of these roles. So check this website out and find some roles that interest you. What you see on the right here of the screen is actually just a snippet of our own when it comes to profiling what a particular role might include. So this is an example of a senior IT administrator role, and there are some courses listed there that from Focal Point's perspective build up to one of the badges that Justin was talking about early on in our time here. So we do a form of digital badging to sort of validate skill sets in particular areas, and then some of those form, individual classes carry their own skills badges, and then classes put together form kind of a profile that can be used in a particular job context. In this case, it's the Cyber Threat Analyst Level 1 badge that is built up to with these 3 courses: the Intro to Cybersecurity, Network Forensics and Investigation, and Windows System Analysis.
And it's an example where an individual in a current job aspires to transition into a cyber role. We've identified the role of analyst, marrying their background and experience and knowledge with an ability and an interest to solve problems and chase details, right? The investigative mindset. And so in order to transition, they're going to take those 3 courses and then transition into that role. But I realize we're getting shortly out of time, and I wanted to take a moment to let Kevin, our moderator here, read some of those questions, because I know Julian, he's been weaving in some of the answers to your questions as we go along, but we're going to go back and sort of find some of those and answer them for you before we end our session today.
Sure, thanks, Buffy. So this question might have been already answered, but it's good to reinforce it. So one attendee asked, I covered 2 years of audit and compliance work. How long would it take me to move into the cyber world? I'm returning to work after 9 months.
I think that the question is about timeliness. And to me, having already gone through audit and compliance, you have that, 1, the attention to detail, 2, some of the language vernacular of our industry. I can picture a transition being as short as 3 months. Julian?
Yeah, I would say so. It's a little bit of a how long is the piece of string question, but definitely, I think if you wanted to look for roles that are maybe audit and compliance related, in the cyber field or cyber organization, then you could look at we have some recommended courses coming up here in the slide deck somewhere. I'm just looking for them on my other screen. There. Yeah, there we go. So this gives you an overview of a lot of the focal point curriculum. Here's a dovetail. We go with some sort of a broader GK portfolio as well. So you could take your audit and compliance background and take some of these foundational areas and be good to start at that point. After just a few weeks of hard graft on some transitional training. It really depends on the employer that you find, but it's absolutely worth doing. I wouldn't wait 6 months to a year of training or developing to try and get into the field. I would say do the foundational pieces, do that Security Plus, start putting in applications, see what employers tell you.
Yeah, and keeping in mind the internship programs, they're often looking for folks with those types of backgrounds because that's viewed as an accelerator. You already have some of the raw skills needed to be successful.
All right, perfect. And we have two similar questions here, so I'll ask it kind of in one swoop. Depending on cybersecurity roles, how important is coding, scripting, including Python, in order to be a successful cyber professional?
That's
especially on the blue team.
Sure. So I would say to get into the role, you do not have to have scripting skills, but to progress in your career, Python is the tool we use to automate many of the investigative processes in cybersecurity. We use it in malware analysis, we use it in log analysis, we use it in threat hunting. It allows us to do our job more quickly, more easily. So having that is a tremendous benefit down the road. Julian, what do you want to add?
Yeah, I'd wholeheartedly agree with that. It's definitely not needed to get started, but you'll find that it's definitely needed to learn to get more kind of advanced and expert in what you're doing, and to be able to build your own automation and your own kind of customized workflows and things. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say once you have a handle on a scripting language, there are a number of tools that have their own scripting languages or are extended by Python. I'm thinking of IDA, but if you have a handle on the basics of and can reverse engineer a script, you can use it as a tool, and that's really what it is.
All right, very good. And one attendee asked, she has about 5 to 10% knowledge in cybersecurity, and they really want to get into ethical hacking. What's the best way to, dive into that?
So when we look at cybersecurity, we kind of have this trifecta of core skills. And they're actually listed on the analyst skill focused block in the center here. We have Windows systems analysis, which is understanding the operating system and operating system components. Ideally, you'd want to know Windows and Linux, because a lot of servers are going to have a Linux operating system. So what we're really referring to is live system analysis, which is looking at a running system and determining areas of compromise. So file structure, memory, in the case of Windows, the registry. And then so that's the core of systems analysis. Then you add on to that network forensics, network investigation, which is following network conversations, being able to attribute when you see traffic on a network, who has it instantiated that conversation, what's going on, where is that traffic going? And then lastly, the behavioral malware analysis, which is malware triage, being able to run a piece of malware and identify what it's doing to a system. And for us, those are sort of the three building blocks upon which you then can go down the road into a specialty skill like pen testing or blue team, purple team, or malware reverse engineering. So I would say if you have experience in one of those areas, round out your experience by those other two areas, and then, take a hacking class and start playing around with those tools. Obviously, in a safe, contained environment. We don't want to encourage you to
safe and legal. Yeah.
Yes, safe and legal environment.
Yeah, I'd just add a sort of an analogy to that as well, just to emphasize how a way in which you could think of ethical hacking as a specialist skill. It's a bit like if you wanted to be a car mechanic, then you need to learn how cars work. So you need to learn how the engine is supposed to run, how the transmission is supposed to function. You need to learn all about that stuff. But you also you need to be able to drive. Because if you don't know how to drive and what normal driving feels like, you won't know if you're doing the right thing as a mechanic. So you can kind of translate that into ethical hacking in the sense that if you've never built up these skills in being able to analyze running systems or analyze network activity, and understand what normal looks like and therefore what not normal looks like, then it's very hard to be effective in a pen testing or an ethical hacking role, because you don't know what impact you're going to have by the things that you do. Whereas if you understand what normal should look like and should feel like, and then you learn the mechanic skills, then you can tinker with the engine and up the horsepower, and you know whether things will run smoothly or whether they are running smoothly when you do that.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, there's a few more questions. That one I want to address is one individual says, my challenge is that I'm an automation engineer with decades of experience. He also has a master's degree in cyber and teaching graduate classes at a local university. His company does not recognize the need internally, and he wants to migrate from one area to another. Is there any suggestions that we can reinforce with this individual?
Wow, so that's a really great background and set of skills to potentially go into management or executive management or even program management. All require sort of the marriage of skill sets, knowledge, experience, oversight with some technical focus. So it sounds like you just need to find the right employer who would allow you to transition into a new role.
Or a cyber architect type role as well.
Yeah.
I think a great fit for that kind of background. But if there's no interest in it, if there's no value attached to it by your current employer, then it might just be as simple as Buffy said, needing to look around for that kind of role elsewhere where the value is understood. Because that's a hugely valuable background.
And I would add that especially for smaller organizations, there are a number of tool shops, I'm going to call them. So vendors have developed some kind of security solution where they're still relatively small fledgling organizations that would value you and your knowledge and experience and give you an opportunity to continue to evolve in a 360-degree way where you are marrying the technological solution with the business need to evolve a product or service.
All right, thanks. So we can progress to the next slide. I know we have about a minute left before the top of the hour.
Yeah, so hey, this is Justin Avery again, following back. We do have a lot of questions here. I wanted to let you all know, first and foremost, if we didn't get to your question, please don't hesitate to hit us up on any of these mediums here that you want to find us through. You can also reach out to Global Knowledge Direct at globalknowledge.com, and they will be able to, through a training advisor, answer your questions about any of the content that GK offers, or specifically if you want to get into some of the follow-ups on Focal Point Academy's information, please don't hesitate to hit us up as well. You can reach us at focal-point.com, and there is a help button right there where you can communicate directly with our sales team, as well as all the other ways through social media that you want to reach us if you want to get creative and go through LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter, but you can come directly to our website as well. The other thing we want to share with you is for taking the time to join us today, we do have an offer for you. There's always an offer, right? So if you want to jump to the next slide, Kevin, where we cover what we're making available to everybody today in the US and Canada. Maybe we skipped it, I'm not entirely sure. But we did want to let everybody know that if you reach out to your training advisors at Global Knowledge, there are discount programs available for you to attend some of these classes and take some of this content and help bridge some of the gaps that you're talking about. How do I get into cybersecurity? Great first step to you to take is to reach out to your training advisor at Global Knowledge. Tell them about the type of role you have and what kind of things you're interested in. They can recommend either courses if you are more foundational and trying to build your first steps into cybersecurity, Global Knowledge has a tremendous curriculum to help you get on that path. And if you're a little more advanced and ready to get into some of the more cybersecurity direct practitioner level type of work that we covered today, they'll be happy to recommend you directly to Focal Point as well. So that's all that we have. I know that we're out of time. I want to thank you all very much for joining us, especially thanks to Kevin for moderating and hosting, to Buffy Ellis and Julian Smith for taking us through this entire overview. And thank you all for attending. We definitely look forward to hearing from you. Please don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you so much for your time today. We really enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you for your time. I would say, best wishes in your current and future career. And if we can help in any way, we would love to.
Hope to see you in our classrooms.